Welcome back to the Fertile Dark, where we dive deep into the realms of psychology and human experience. I'm Krista, here with my co-host Daniel. Today we share a powerful episode with our guest, Dr. Ashley Fiorilli, who discusses the principles of acceptance and commitment therapy. She explored with us practical ways to use the principles of ACT to increase personal power in our daily living. We discussed the importance of presence, awareness, and play in the growth process. We also heard Ashley's take on staying regulated with others who are dysregulated. We learned about setting healthy boundaries and also discussed developing a healthy view of the self. So if you're interested in hearing more about Ashley's approach to holistic development, stay tuned. You won't want to miss it. So Ashley, I was wondering if you could just tell us more about your background.
Yeah, so I am a behavior analyst by credential. And that started many moons ago in 2007. So I consider myself a grandma in the field, if you will. And so I've been doing the work. I started with early intervention, and that kind of morphed into today's work of I primarily am working with adults half in a crisis facility, extensive trauma backgrounds, intellectual disabilities, and then half of my work is also one-to-one therapeutic coaching with all of the different tools at the disposal. So it's been a journey over the last 15-ish years of starting with toddlers and now really settling into, I think, the what I was meant to do work with adults.
Nice. Could you speak more to, these two different arenas that you're working in right now that you're more focused on, and maybe some of the differences and similarities between those aspects of your work?
Mm-hmm. So the crisis home is 24-hour care. We've had residents that have been dropped off by caregivers at emergency rooms, kind of refusing to bring them back to where they reside. And so that work, I feel like the foundation, like the underlying of all sides of the work is regulation for me, curiosity, and creativity. Those are like the things that I lean into and try to bring to all facets of the work. And so in that facility, particularly, right, regulation takes a bigger space. And my role is more traditional in that sense of I'm supervising people, I'm giving a lot more directions and leadership, but bringing kind of those three aspects of me, I guess, to that place. And the one-to-one work is mostly women, I would say mostly women in their 30s-ish with anxiety, depression. That's a story of mine. I have found different tools to work through and navigate. And so having that connection to younger women that have that experience and are kind of in that exploration phase of what does it look like when I'm curious about myself, when I have creativity about how I can move my body to feel regulated. And so those things still kind of show up, but in different ways. And it's very hard for me to remove my behavior analytic hat. And so data looks similar and different in a lot of ways. If I'm collecting data in different ways in the group home, hard, fast numbers. And then in the one-to-one work, it's body language, it's openings, it's closings of the words that we're using together too.
I wanted to say, I just think it's really interesting the way that you describe these different facets of the work, where you have this like data-driven side and then the one-on-one side. I'm really curious about that because even in the disciplines that I know that you specialize in, there does seem to be this real bringing together. And I'm curious about that journey for you. Like, how did you get to this place that you're in of being able to balance these two worlds so well?
Yes, that is a question I ask myself every day of like, how do I keep the balance? And every day I feel like someone will cancel me as a behavior analyst, and I'm okay with that. So I think there's acceptance in pushing that boundary. So where I really found the sweet spot was learning about acceptance and commitment therapy as a part of that work. And in the beginning, there was a lot of conversation of like behavior analysts can't do that. And now it's a lot more flexible in that way. And that for me really brought together something I was always missing from my pre-ACT work, I guess. And so I spent a lot of time kind of translating what the ACT processes look like in some different data collection measures, so I can feel settled and grounded in the work and still get the visual analysis that I need as a behavior analyst, not only for the science, but it's just something I really love myself. And so that kind of journey was really like diving in, finding my people that think on the fringe, and having some different groups and being supervised by LMFTs versus behavior analysts as well. And so really getting much broader picture of what goes into behavior, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm curious about that because I know very little about the behavior analyst world. I know other behavior analysts, and I have like a snapshot or like little snapshots of some of what they do. Yeah, I'm just curious about that. I think a little bit more because like what you're saying about like ACT and some of these other things, that feels familiar, but I'm curious about how are those two things, like how is it different? How is it connected?
Yeah. So the traditional role of a behavior analyst, which has mainly been mandated by insurance, has been autism service providers working in early interventions and early research from LOVAS, which is very controversial at this point. It was 40 hours a week for little learners to really capitalize on the brain's ability to learn 5 and under. And so that looked very different. And the teaching strategies were very direct, discreet, and rigid on a lot of levels. And so now this shift into psychological flexibility really being there, I think we're connecting to it as behavior analysts because there's a lot of language-based learners that way of teaching, right, hasn't worked and hasn't gotten where they're working on the things that are important to them. And so now moving into this ACT world, being a language-based intervention and having these connections of language and behavior analysts have the two schools of thought of thinking isn't a behavior or thinking is a behavior. And so we all fight about that to this day. I'm obviously of the persuasion that thinking is a behavior and that it impacts our body and how we move through. And so that, I think, those two orientations have just wrestled with each other. And so there's a lot of people that have snapshots of behavior analysts that probably are not great snapshots of the work that we do, or very particular, working with a child, teaching them very specific things and not caring about other things. It's like they don't exist. I can't see it. It's not specific, observable, measurable. And ACT, for me as a behavior analyst, has opened that up to, oh yes, all of these things are important. All of these variables are important, this information. And that connecting factor, like when I said I was missing something before. So I practiced yoga since I was a teenager, and I originally wanted to connect yoga and ABA for like kids in a social skills environment and partner yoga and communication. And that didn't really happen in the way I was like hoping. But when I found ACT and I was like, being present, accepting, that was that connection. I was like, this is how I bring what I wanted from yoga into my work as a behavior analyst.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. I guess I'd never even thought about ACT being a vehicle for some of these principles of yoga in a therapeutic setting. Yeah, that's so cool. I guess it like reframes some of the things that in listening your podcast episodes, I think it just reframed some things for me in thinking about that a little bit differently. And that's a really beautiful way to think about it.
Yeah, so the two things I wrote down on my piece of paper when I was thinking about kind of getting ready for today, the word yoga, right? There's a root of that means to yoke, to bring together. And I hadn't really thought about it before in terms of having ACT was the ability to like yoke what I was seeking in yoga. And there's that perception, right? Yoga is movement based and yoga is an exercise and a workout. And there's so much more to what it really is. And so when I get to a client and having these interactions, my self-study of what's happening in those interactions, how I'm showing up, right? All of those are these different threads of my yoga teachings without the physical movement. And I've kind of reframed my perspective of my sessions are a physical yoga practice. My sessions are an asana, if you will, but it's not yoga in a studio practice.
That's beautiful. I'm curious how, so you have this history in yoga, not just personal, but you actually became a teacher. How has that training influenced your approach to therapy?
It added in a way that I don't think I expected. And so when I went through my yoga teacher training, right, you're learning about body and positions and these muscle movements and the philosophy, the Yoga Sutras. And when I shifted into the ACT world, I found that my skill of a yoga teacher and watching bodies was so much more meaningful in a one-to-one session to watch the person in front of me. And not really, language is important, yes, and someone's body can tell you so much more than the language. So when I'm with someone and words are saying one thing, but body does another, those subtle shifts, I think that's like the really big gift that I got out of yoga teacher training is how to really watch bodies. And in that training, right, it's like, is this, going one way or the other? Is the alignment proper? But those subtle movements, as I'm learning the person in front of me, become more salient, and I can see, oh, we're under this place of aversiveness, or we're under this challenging moment that's closing us in. And where do I see the body start to open or relax, or facial expressions change, which are all behaviors, just in a very different way than how I was trained as a behavior analyst. So there's one of my mentors, Emily Sandaz. She will talk about, because we have private behaviors and public behaviors, and she'll say, I don't really think there's private behaviors, because if you really know the person in front of you, their private behaviors become public because you're learning those really subtle pieces. And so I think that's the gift from the yoga teacher training, really.
I really love this idea. I wonder if you have some specific examples that come to mind of some ways that you notice watching the body giving you an indicator of what's going on under the surface.
We have those really big body behaviors, right? We open our chest or widen our shoulders. Like when we're talking about something, there's the sinking in feeling that have those. And a lot of times that like sinking in, right? When I do that right now, I start to feel closed in. And so that can be a moment where I might pause the person in front of me and say, hey, right, I just noticed this thing happen. And depending on the person, I can take that deeper of like, your body just changed in this way. Or the subtle movements of like eyes looking into the corners and they're pausing of like, well, what is that? What are you noticing right here in this moment? Your eyes went over here, right? Like the subtleties of facial expressions. Those are the things I think I pick up on more with the person in front of me to really kind of go, what space are we in? Are we in an opening, curious space? Are we in an uncomfortable, trying to run away from this space moment?
I just get this sense of a holistic approach to growth and transformation with your background in a more cognitive and quantitative approach through like behavior analysis, and then you have your body yoga. I'd like to hear more a little bit, if you don't mind, about acceptance and commitment training, and kind of what the steps of that might look like in a given scenario, maybe.
Yeah, I have to say the first time I went to a conference that was based in acceptance and commitment therapy, I was like, my people, I have found my people. It just felt like the right cozy sweater that was like put on. And so it's such an interesting question when you say the right, like the steps of it. And I say that because a lot of behavior analysts, when I talk to them or they'll call me or send me a message, it's like, what do I do? What are the steps of this thing unfolding? Because we're so technologically based. And I always talk about the process, the process is a process where the outcome is a process. And that's very hard for behavior analysts to think about. First started, there's 6 core processes of acceptance and commitment therapy. And some people will say therapy, and other behavior analysts that are, I'll say scared, but maybe that's not the right word, fearful, or like not in having confidence about building those skills, will say training, because they also don't want to be like, I'm doing therapy and I'm not supposed to be doing that type of therapy. It's weird language things that are happening. But there's 6 core processes that we move through: acceptance on the flexible side, present moment awareness, connecting to values, our committed actions, this flexible perspective of ourself, and then that cognitive diffusion, to see thoughts as thoughts. And so starting out with that, it was really, can I describe this process to somebody else? And can I like teach my client in front of me to recognize, oh, I'm in fusion and I need to apply a diffusion activity for this, and really kind of use those terms to support my learning. And now I find the process is, we don't really need to use the vocabulary. Can we just get there? And with the prompts and the pauses and slowing them down in front of me, I start to implant my little voice. So when outside of sessions, they come back and they're like, well, I heard you and I paused and I did this, and I can hear them talk through that process of building psychological flexibility and being engaged in their environment more than they were before.
That sounds so rich. I also love that description, like a cozy sweater. My partner is a huge fiber art person, so there's lots of knitting that happens in our home, and so I have a very like specific response to the idea of like the perfect cozy sweater. It's just so great.
Yeah.
What was it about it? Like, so you go to this conference and it's like, these are your people. It's like the perfect cozy sweater. Like, what was it about it there? I know you spoke a little bit about the yoga piece, but yeah, I'm curious.
Yeah, I think for the community aspect, as a behavior analyst, conferences are 8 to 5 every hour. You've got your 5 to 10 minutes to get from hotel A to hotel B. You've got 40 minutes for lunch. Like, you're getting your 32 CEs that you need to, and it's exhausting, right? So I went to the Association for Contextual Behavior Science, the ACBS conference, and the first thing I went to, they started with a present moment activity, getting rooted, getting grounded before we even got into learning. And I found that really helpful right after moments of transition. And the other thing I felt just in that space was there wasn't anything less than an hour and a half. So there was room to stay, to explore. There was more role plays. I had done a self-compassion workshop with this specific woman, and she's crying, I'm crying. And I just would have never found that in a behavior analytic conference at that point. I don't think. So it was really like settling into, I have space to explore this thing, and people are authentically showing up in real plays and not just these role plays of early learners. And we're humans, we're complex beings. We can take a moment, we can cry about it. I just felt the conference itself was really rich in the human experience, from planning to attending, if that makes sense.
No, it does make sense. Yeah, I've done a lot of role playing that feels mechanical.
Mm-hmm.
And then, yeah, there is something really special about being able to ground center, like really be rooted in the moment and actually be really there. Allow yourself to feel deeply and to the point where we can cry together and have these moments.
Mm-hmm.
That's really special.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a very lovely community I've just grown to love over the last couple of years.
And you now provide training in ACT.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Yeah. So through, I guess, the bringing together of the worlds, last year I actually presented at the ACBS conference on flexible data collection and what does that look like, which, was a little scary as a behavioral analyst, kind of like walking into a more psychologist based realm and being like, here's how you might consider to take data on this thing that we do. And I've just found the value being able to translate and give people really what I hope is really practical tools in the training. And so a lot of my CEs or workshops, that's my value of it, is let's do something together here that you can solidify in a learning process that then you can go do something with it. And I've heard, because ACT, right, it's rooted in behavior analytic principles in different ways, but it's not coming out of our science. So it's coming more out of third wave psychology. And so people will go to trainings and be like, it's so cool. And how do I do it? And that's, I think, what people are missing. So I try to put on my thinking cap as much of how do we translate this to make it practical for the little learners, the teenage learners, the adult learners, and where can those tweaks be made to enrich what we do as behavior analysts.
Yeah, I love that because that is really hard. It's hard to translate those things and to also feel really practical. I know a lot of the training that I've done, there's a lot of movement that's happening internally. And also, I don't feel like it's something that I could hand somebody and say, here's just a really easy thing you can go work with. It's like we've kind of got to do this thing together. And that I feel like sometimes it could be nice to have something else in my pocket to say, hey, here's a really nice tool.
Yeah. And I think maybe other fields don't understand about the behavior analytic system or structured is in a more traditional model. I'm not necessarily going to be the one delivering interventions. So there's what we call registered behavior technicians that are typically overseen by this mid-level provider who's then overseen by the behavior analyst. So in my role as a behavior analyst, if I'm working within that system, in a perfect world, I'm supposed to train these two people basically to kind of be me, but without the education and the other trainings, and implement with integrity and fidelity just as I would. And the more I think about that, the more bananas I think it becomes in my mind that that's an expectation when we look at other supervisory relationships in the psychology world, that's just not the expectation to have people be mini yous in different ways. And so that I think is the challenge, is most behavior analysts are not as connected to their clients as the actual person who's implementing.
That's an interesting dynamic to navigate.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to speak more to your intention to provide tools for people that are accessible and usable. I was listening to your podcast and felt like you did such a great job of offering not just theories, but examples and little phrases that could be applied anywhere. And so I just wanted to to say that I appreciated that about your work, and also just ask what do you keep in mind for yourself to bring this type of accessible information to people?
First, thank you for that. That is very nice to hear that it's accessible and practical for people. I have my own rituals and routines to build into my day. I love tea. Tea is a ritual in my mind of how I brew it, which tea flavor I choose. Like, that is a mindful act in my morning that leads to some journaling, some reflection. So I try to start my day out from that place as much as possible. And then kind of settling into my work of the teachers before me, and whether that's a teacher before me in my yogic realm, my mentors, my supervisors, the connections that I have, like going back to the wisdom that they've shared and finding the simple piece of it, right? And parsimony is a big thing in behavior analysis. It's like behaviors under the control of the simplest thing, which ... so many other complex things can be happening. But looking for the simplest thing. So when I think of the simplest way to get distance from my thoughts is literally, I'm noticing. That phrase, I'm noticing, feels so simple and so powerful at the same time. And I think the more people hear, I'm noticing what I'm noticing, then it just becomes just more accessible than this really complex metaphor that I could be guiding them through, or other aspects. So it's like, what is the thread of simplicity that I try to go back to as much as possible, which can be hard because my brain likes to take on all the variables and kind of get into the intricacies of the complex person that's in front of me too.
I feel like I just barely listened to you talking about this. Did you do this one in your most recent one about education?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was so cool, Tate. Like, that I'm noticing phrase felt like there was a lot of potency in there. Yeah. Could you, like, I love that one. Would you be able to just talk a little bit more about that? How is it that the noticing is able to have the power to shift things around?
I think it is, well, it's the distance, and it puts us in touch with our observing self, which I think is that self that doesn't do judgment, self-evaluations. There's a metaphor that just came to mind as you were asking. It's the sky and the weather, and it's the self as the sky, this boundless, pure, endless self. So when we can tap into that noticing, we aren't attached to our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions. So there's that non-attachment practice, which is also rooted in yogic philosophy as well. So the I'm noticing starts to bring in that part of the self, versus I've always thought of selves in layers of a cake, like the experiencing self of like, I'm right here, I can tap into my sensory experience. And then there's the narrative self that has all of the statements and judgments and thoughts about what's actually happening, which can be connected or not to what's actually happening. And then there's that observing self that sees those other parts of myself. And so that seeing self, right, gives us so much more like relief, I think. Like, I just wanted to take a breath as I said that. Like, it just sees that we're not this thing here. We're all the things that we've experienced in life. And this moment doesn't define us. This thought doesn't define us. And there's that room for flexible choosing of where we want to move from that seeing self.
That's really potent. I was actually I wanted to ask you about the idea of self through the lens of ACT, because I feel like I've also heard you talk about these different selves. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about these different selves, but I'm also really interested in practices that help us get into that observing self. that being that big perspective.
Yeah. So under the ACT umbrella, it can be talked about as self as context or self as content. And the content is the labels, right, that we put on ourselves, and the context is that observer self. It can also be referenced as flexible self perspective. I'm this person across different places, people, time, experiences. Or I have a rigid self perspective, which is I'm only seeing myself through one lens, one experience through those places. So the layers of the self, I feel like, is my mesh of like the yoga side, the ACT side, and getting into those. For the tools to get into that space, this is where I do think sometimes metaphors can be really helpful. There's one about a chessboard and the pieces of the chessboard versus the person who's playing the game. So being the pieces versus the person playing the game, and the pieces can be those different experiences of yourself. And you can, if you're focused on one piece and you can't make your move, versus you're up here and you're seeing the whole board, you can make different moves. And that can be tailored to like a soccer field if somebody has a preference for sports, or a school classroom. So that I think is a practical one to give people this is what it feels like to think like that. And like the other practical, like I think labeling the parts, which isn't necessarily, I think, like an ACT tool in itself, maybe more internal family system related, these different parts that show up. But I found that to be really practical with my one-to-one clients of something showing up. And I'll give an example. I was with a client the other day. She just got back from a vacation. She was like, oh, it was so much better. I didn't have any stress about anything. And I was like, okay, so there's this part of you that is now the vacation you, and you're coming to home you. And what wisdom does vacation you have for home you? And that opened her up to like 10 ideas of how she could actually incorporate vacation her into her day-to-day to have more of that stress relieving factor and balance that she's seeking. So I think actually giving the parts names can be really helpful for different folks.
Yeah, that does feel very connected to or aligned with internal family systems, and that parts and naming parts and what's the wisdom that the part has to share.
Ashley, to investigate a little more into the idea of trying to be present, working through these layers of cake, so to speak, and having that sense of awareness. How do you notice when clients are reaching a certain plateau in that process? And what are some steps that you might take to kind of evaluate the next step you need to make?
Yeah. So I love the concept of workability within ACT. And that's something I try to keep in mind with clients of, are we in a workable place? Does it feel workable for them? And by workable, they're willing to go, they're willing to experience, they're willing to tap in, even very slightly. And if it feels like a plateau, revisit where we actually are in this window of workability or window of flexibility, if you will, and look very subtly, I guess, for ways to continue to like stay or open that window more. And I can think of one of the adults that I work with when she first moved in, window of workability was like minus 1,000. She just wasn't interested in anything. And that also signals to me sometime, right, if I pull in maybe some trauma-informed pieces of safety. And so if there's a really hard push down on workability, or we've stopped in some way, are we also evaluating safety in that moment, safety to explore? Maybe there's something else. And for me as a behavior analyst, I have to keep in mind, right, what's in scope, what's not, where do I refer if we reach that place. And I've had clients in the past that have had childhood trauma, and I've explained, here's how we're working, right? We're noticing, we're using that history here and now. But if you ever want to go back to dig into that history, right, that's someone else. And I've gotten to the point with a couple clients where we've done a lot of that really lovely noticing willingness work. And it gets to the point where then they're comfortable ending our, relationship and seeking more therapeutic services to dig into those deeper layers and onions. So sometimes I think of I'm building foundational skills that are really complex for a lot of people and hard. And depending on their history, that plateau might mean we just keep opening small, 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 or there might be at a point for someone else's robust set of skills.
I really do appreciate this so much, Ashley. Because the way that we met was not in either of these kinds of environments. It was in sand tray training, which feels very different, but I think it's just becoming more apparent to me a little bit more of how it is that you're able to be present in the way that you are, in a way that is just a really beautiful way of showing up in the present moment.
Thank you.
And I'm curious about what are some things maybe that you've learned about yourself and your own journey through learning about ACT and teaching other people about it?
Oh, such a journey. I was actually reflecting on this in some way because yesterday happened to be my 15th anniversary of being a behavior analyst. And also I got a reminder of oh, I've been doing ACT work for 10 years, which it doesn't feel like 10 years at this point, or on some level. And there's just so much to learn about the self. I feel like it's hard in that way. And I have learned I'm generally a very stubborn, hard-headed individual. It can be very opinionated in different systems, and especially when I feel like care and consideration and certain values are not being upheld by the people around me. I become very loud, not in voice, but in here's what I think is actually the way to go. And so in my ACT work, right, there's my own noticing comes out in those meetings in those ways, or if I have an interaction with somebody and then immediately I can send a text and say, yep, I'm actually reacting from this place. And that's not how I wanted to show up. And getting feedback from them of well, if that's your reactive place, then I think you're okay. But also knowing myself. So I think it's just been a journey of my own character traits and how they show up, and where I know I can be that stick in the mud, and what tools need to come in for me to get different perspectives. And I have colleagues that I'll call or we'll text each other, and you literally our phrase is, do you have a moment to talk off the ledge, right? We're both in a ledge in different ways. And so I'll jump on the phone. That person will give me some ACT language. I'm like, okay, great. Here we are. And now I'm back down to being able to make a different choice for what's happening in front of me. So I think it's just the awareness of what my brain and my body really want to do, and having that space of noticing to go, do I want to lean into this part of me, or do I want to make a different choice? And sometimes I'm like, no, actually, stubborn Ashley is going to show up to this meeting, and there's a reason for that, and we're going to see what happens. Or no, she's going to take a breath and she's going to turn her camera off for a brief second and press my feet into the ground and then turn my camera back on. So it's just, in those challenging moments, when they're unfolding in clinical situations, that's where I think it's given me so much more clarity about who I am.
Oh, I really appreciate just the versatility there. Sometimes it's okay to show up in all of my stubbornness and say, yes, no, I will be here.
Mm-hmm.
And there are other times when it's okay to turn the camera off and do some quick grounding. Say, maybe not today. I am curious if it'd be okay to maybe look at some of the intersection with some of the other work that you do, because ACT feels very there's this cognitive behavioral piece. It's very practical. And also you've got some work in other areas, yoga and sand and some of these other things. And I'm curious how you see those intersecting in your work.
It all feels just like a really big toolbox. And sand tray, I have been starting to view through the lens of ACT, right? And how there can be similar processes unfolding. And actually, how I found sand tray and our training is in one of the consultation groups that I'm in. There's a sand tray therapist in that group. And so her and I connected, and she told me about Teresa. And I was like, well, let's do this. Let's see what happens. And so I think when we talk about parts of the self, there's, we're not labeling what's showing up in the sand for the other person as the self, but from a theoretical perspective, I'm looking at this person is on some level looking down on themselves and what's showing up in the tray and these different facets of their life and parts of who they are, whether that part is an actual part of them, a memory part of them, a feeling part of them. So it kind of comes together in that way. And then I've started to take sand to the group home. Language can be different for some of our residents and specific ways of thinking. And so that can kind of open up something in a different way and have us do something different than just focus on the behavior plan, those things that are more structured, and gives us a space to play, right? And in the one-to-one side, it's an offering. Everything I have, I feel like, is an offering for the person in front of me. So some sessions we're doing logical troubleshooting about something going on, a routine that they want to build. Great. Here's what you want it to look like. Let's map it out. Other times we're staying with some of the somatic work and moving through what's showing up. Other times it's exploring through sand tray. And so I think that translative kind of part of me that sees the connections just under different labels and different disciplines helps me kind of go, sand is helping this person open up and explore this. Sand for this person is aversive and they don't want to do it, and that's okay. Breathing is helping in this sense. Moving into habit training is, so that's, I think, the piece where I'm like, here's all the things, and we can do what's needed in the moment to keep us in that space of opening.
So it's really filling that function of this is another tool in the kit that we can have on hand as a way to help somebody really come into their body, connect with their experience, and then be open to exploration.
Yeah. And what I'll add, I think, too, that's helpful is, so I mentioned Emily Sandoz earlier, and so she's one of my mentors, and her orientation of flexibility really is under the umbrella terms of aversive learning repertoires and appetitive learning repertoires. And aversive being the things that close us in, have rigidity and flexibility, and appetitive being what's the long-term reinforcing thing, what keeps us there. And so I found, when I found her, another light bulb kind of went on in terms of, yes, this is a person to have in my corner, because ACT and the 6 core processes, right? It's a label, it's the process of this, versus that perspective is what is the tool, right? What is the prompt, the language, the thing that gets us to experience more appetitive places, if that makes sense.
I'm trying to wrap my head around it. Do you have an example of that? Like how the sand could help us with that? Or any of the other things?
Yeah, I think like noticing the body language, noticing the closing, noticing what someone's not talking about in the tray shows me that that's a potentially aversive space. Noticing what they really want to explore and where they want to go and where they feel like they're opening into that could be more of that appetitive space. And a lot of times too, clients are talking really fast, maybe not in like a passionate way, but in that circular way. I'm going, hey, we're under something aversive here. So maybe we create a pause, maybe we create something in this moment to slow us down. And can I prompt, right, to get to that appetitive space? And for some people, they don't want to go there. And that's okay. That's, again, that place of workability. So I have for some clients of like, all right, you want to rant for 2 minutes? Let's set a timer and you rant for 2 minutes and we're going to breathe afterwards and then see where we can shift. So I think that's those places of aversive and appetitive. It's all the different things, and it's the bi-directional piece, right? Like I'm behaving, which impacts how the person in front of me is behaving and the function between us. And so that's the other, we didn't really touch on, but a lot of behavior analysts like really focus on function of what's the function here. Is the function traditionally for attention, avoidance, escape, like sensory exploration? And there's some tools that really explore the interpersonal functions, the inner behaviorism of it. Is this overgeneralizing what I'm sharing because I don't have the skills to maintain a different type of conversation? Am I undergeneralizing because I'm scared and I don't want to share? So I also keep in mind, if someone in front of me just vents for 50 minutes, one, I'm not doing my job as a behavior analyst. That's probably more of a talk therapy setting because I'm not behaving. So if I'm not behaving, nothing's going to shift in here. So I know that kind of went a little bit more than the aversive appetitive, but that's kind of how those spaces can unfold.
No, that's really helpful. I guess I'm also thinking about times in my own trays when there are some things in the tray. I mean, for those who haven't seen a tray, I mean, it's a box of sand and you put toys in it. That's what it looks like. There's a lot more to it, but that's the essence of what you would see. And so for me, like I can think of times when I've looked at something and had a very strong reaction to it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was really sad that you didn't get to be there in the level 6 training. You would have seen this exact thing play out, actually.
Yeah.
But I remember I think it was the second day, the sand tray that I built, I had these really interesting figures that were in the tray, and I didn't want to look at them at all. And there was a lot there. I mean, I sat with it and worked with it, but there was a real strong reaction in my body to those figures. And I felt really uncomfortable. But then also holding somebody else's tray where they had a figure, like they had a miniature in the tray, and they said, I feel strongly towards this thing. I feel like I need to take it out and replace it with something else so that I can't actually see it in the sand. And so I wonder if that is in line with what you're talking about here.
Yeah, there's for the taking out and replacing, right? That there's an avoidance of something there in that space. And, in some other time, maybe not that time, right? But exploring what would it be like to stay with it and not replace it, if that's a workable place to be in, right? And some people will be like, no, I have to take it out right now, which, okay, let's take it out, right? It doesn't have to stay. What's it like when we take it out? There's an exploration there. But yes, I think one of the prompts that I'll use is notice where your eyes want to go in your tray and notice where your eyes want to avoid. And I kind of give that as an exploration, after they've talked about their world some, and we're kind of in the place of maybe wrapping up, just like, where do you keep wanting to go or keep wanting to avoid? And what would you want to share about that? Just in general can be helpful.
That is really helpful. I feel like I'm starting to understand a little bit better now.
Yeah. Yeah. The aversive appetitive language I found so I'm in two spaces. One's half behavior analyst and a clinical psychologist, and the other one's is mostly clinical psychologists or LMFTs, and bringing that aversive appetitive language is like, what are you talking about? And it's really it's the variables, it's the context, it's all the things that add to that. So I wonder, if we can use your sand tray example, like if you were at home with your tray and not in a group of people, right? If that aversion would feel as strong or if it would feel more approachable, right? And that's playing around with the context and the variables of, well, maybe it's not that place or that time to do it, and finding what makes it feel more approachable, what other variables come in. Maybe it's a lavender diffuser that, like, part of a sand tray ritual that brings in some different variables too. So yeah.
No, it's really helpful. Yeah. I'm even just thinking about that particular tray. I like went in the back. So there's the whole room where all the sand trays are. And I went and found the back corner of the room. And I was like tucked away by myself in this back corner, just me.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, I'm okay. Just me.
Just me.
No one needs to look at this. And then I had the thought, like, I'm not willing to do this on my own. Like, I need someone to come over. Like, there's something that I'm not able to see or not willing to see. So I had to go find someone and say, okay, can you come and help me look at this? Because I can't do it on my own. Or I won't do it on my own. And I'm not sure which it is. Either way, I'm not doing it. And I feel like I need to do that.
Yeah. So that person put you more in the appetitive learning space.
Okay.
Opened up your experience. That was the resource that was needed.
Okay. I feel like I'm connecting some dots here. Oh. No, that's really interesting, having that as a framework that you bring into this space of sand tray, which is it's a really right brain experience. And so then to bridge those two together, that's really interesting.
Yeah. It's been really fun to incorporate, and I miss our trainings at the same time. But yeah, because I've been utilizing an online version for my telehealth clients, which has been interesting, and they've all loved it and have found it really helpful in different ways. So it's where does it come in that feels supportive, and just keep exploring. And even personally, like, I know I'll use my tray for myself, and kind of similar, like the last week I was like, I haven't done a tray in a while, and I was like, what am I avoiding? Like, that was my first question. What do I not want to put in this tray and sit and think about? And I was like, well, I guess we'll find out. I'm going to sit with it and see what shows up.
Yeah. I keep my tray right next to my bed. I use it as a nightstand because it's on like a little rolly cart. So it's the right height for a nightstand. So every day I'm next to it and I pay attention to how long it's been since I built a tray. And I have that same question. What am I avoiding? What do I not want to look at?
I was going to say, last weekend, I set up all my stuff because I have like mobile sand tray. And I was like, all right, we're going to just have an experience all day. I put all my stuff. I like went about my normal routines, watched TV, watched movies, made meals. And then every time I kind of felt curious of like, I'm going to go look at the stuff, I would put like one thing in my tray. So I built my tray probably over 8-ish hours. And then I let it sit. And then the next morning I came back to look at it. And I was like, okay, all right, this feels powerful. So it was just a different approach to it too, for, I think, in that place of, I don't really know if I want to continuously explore, but where can I play with moment to moment exploration?
That would be really interesting. It almost, I mean, I'm curious about what the experience would have been like, what it was like for you. I mean, my curiosity there is I wonder if there was a certain aspect of liminality that you stayed in over the course of the day, or if it was an into out of or something else. Yeah. What was that like to build over the course of the day?
Yeah, it felt like an in and out of process, where I would sit on the couch and I would look over and I'd be like, not now. Okay. Put on my show. I'd get up to get water and I would like have something and I'd be like, and I would go look, put it. So it felt felt like an in-out experience, which was different. And it didn't feel disconnected because when I processed it the next day, it was all connected. Like even the lines of what was across from each other had meaning that I, didn't think about when I was building it in different ways. And so it was just a nice, extended, more gentle process, maybe. And if I can use the language of appetitive, by having my shows and snacks and drinks, that's keeping me in the more open space, I think, versus if I would have not had those things, it would have probably felt a little bit more constricted or, well, I'm going to build consecutively versus space, and probably would have had a very different process, like processing the next day.
Oh, that's a great way to frame that up. You had all of your safety there, all of your security there to help you stay in that space of openness.
It seems like there's this theme in your work, Ashley, of looking at what you're avoiding and what you're going toward. And I was just interested in, I noticed that you also have talked about the nervous system. And so I was just kind of curious about the nervous system and its role in that kind of dynamic of going, looking at what you're going toward and avoiding.
It's so important to have that awareness of the nervous system for myself, I think, and then also the people in front of me. And there's so many windows, right? We have the window of tolerance that we stay within. We have a window of workability, a window of flexibility, willingness, however you want to talk about it. And so I try to match those. So if someone pops out of their window of tolerance because they're going into avoidance, fight, flight type of behavior, my trajectory shifts, right? I'm no longer trying to get us to appetitive spaces. I'm just going back to regulation and grounding. And really then the curiosity is like, can we reapproach from a different place? So can we reapproach from a place that doesn't pop us out of that window of tolerance? And so co-regulation, right? Having that ability to see if someone pops out of their window. And I don't want to tell them how to regulate. I want to be able to model regulation in those moments. Can I take a deep breath? Can I slow down? Can I pause? And which counters sometimes what we learn as behavior analysts, because a lot of us are fixers and doers and problem solvers. And when crisis happens, there's a plan. Step one, this. Step two, this. And a lot of times slowing down is not a part of that process. And so in the work that I do, I find the regulation and overlapping. Have we moved too far into an aversive, or are we still in a workable space? Can we stay regulated? Those are the questions that stay in my mind with different things.
Yeah, I love the emphasis on stillness that you brought up. And I was wondering about the name of your practice, Be Still, Be Connected, and wondered if that had any sort of tie into what you just spoke about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like I named my business before I knew what it would embody. I don't know if that makes sense. So part of my 500 hours for my yoga teacher training was a project. And my original project was like this workshop of helping people with self-care. And it was very like, we're going to do the thing. And my yoga teacher was like, yeah, but is that like really what you want your project to be? And so at that point, I had been thinking about making a website. And my original website was just my name, ashleyfiorilli.com. And I was like, that feels so hard to lean into making a website with my name. And she's like, yeah, but how are people going to find you? And there was like so much work just in putting myself out there in that space. and I was really avoiding. So my website became my like yoga project of like leaning into showing up for myself. And we had done, I don't know if we did a vision board or if it was just something I did on my own. I tend to do them at the end or beginning of years to kind of connect to like what I'm calling in for the next year. And I had done this vision board, and through the conversation in that space, it was like, yeah, it has talks about stillness and connection. And I was like, yeah, I could call my company Be Still, Be Connected. And I never had the picture in my mind of who I would be as a practitioner today, obviously making that name, but it's something I resonate with so much now in cultivating that with other people and for myself. And so, yeah, like it's kind of just grown to its own thing that I'm now embodying the name, and the journey and the twists and turns. And I know there's different scripture that kind of talk about like be still and know. And that kind of is also a place of like, yeah, when you're still, you're connected to yourself, you're connected to others, nature. You have a knowing that you didn't have before. And so, yeah, it's kind of taken an interesting journey of like where the name came from off of a vision board and how I connect to it now.
I wonder if it would be okay for us to actually run some scenarios past you that are like questions that people have given that I feel like I would love your perspective on and that they would really benefit from.
Okay, yeah. Let's see.
One of them is directly connected to what you were just saying, which is when you're sitting across from somebody, like this idea of staying regulated and staying in your own window of tolerance. I know a lot of people who actually are listeners of the podcast who spend their time with a lot of dysregulated individuals, meaning teenagers and kids. What would you say to some of them to help them stay regulated in those moments when the people they're with are very dysregulated?
I think the first thing that I always found really helpful was knowing where everyone's at in a dysregulation cycle. So if you're familiar with traditional crises models of highest point of crises, and then we start to move towards de-escalation or post-crisis, the person that's in that crisis, the helpers, the supporters, we're behind them in our own crisis. So when they're de-escalating, we're actually at our higher point of escalation. And so I find awareness of we're on different paths can be really helpful, just from that intellectual side of you're coming to down, and if I can kind of catch myself, I'm still moving up. This isn't the place to say something. This isn't the place to try to like co-regulate because I'm still kind of going through that cycle. There's something kind of settling in knowing that, if that makes sense. And for, I think the sensory aspects, what are the things in the environment that you work that help you stay connected? So is it a fuzzy rug without socks, if that's where you can be? Is it a warm cup of tea or coffee you can get your hands around and feel the warmth and stay connected to? Is it a seat that you can twist in from side to side to bring a little bit of movement? Those are those moments that I think can be really helpful for the sensory input of what keeps me connected to the here and the now. And then when everybody gets towards that de-escalation, right, it's like, let's just take a breath together. Or even labeling, I'm going to take a breath. You can join me. You don't have to. I'm going to take one and do that for us in this moment.
So if I'm understanding right, first recognizing where are we at in kind of this cycle of dysregulation, finding a thing that helps me to regulate, and then being the one that offers this opportunity to regulate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the breath is like the number one way to regulate, which also isn't always accessible to like remind yourself to take a deep breath. So that's where I feel like those tangible things can be visual reminders, that can tap you into, oh, I need to grab this thing right now to kind of help get me to that space where I can take this deep breath, right? Because when we breath hold, that's amping up our nervous system versus giving it the release that it needs.
I find that that's something that I often end up doing during the day. Although I've never come at it from the place of offering the breath as an invitation.
Mm-hmm.
Let's take a breath together, or I
Mm-hmm.
will. You're welcome to join me.
Yeah. I think there's so much power in being able to model that, and humanity, like being a human, right? And knowing, oh, we're both up there, right? I can recognize it, having that honesty and transparency with whoever's in front of you, whether it's a teen or an adult. Um, like I have adults that, I come in and they're like, how are you today? And I'm honest of, I didn't sleep great last night. Do you want to do a low energy activity together, or do you want to take a walk and let's get energized, right? So letting them letting my like clients know that we're human too, right? We experience anxiety and worry and stress and dysregulation. So there's not that sense of isolation and loneliness in it too.
That it does feel like there's some real power in that, of being able to model, hey, I'm a human being, I'm a person too. In this moment, we're both not okay. Let me help you see a way to be able to do this, and simultaneously help me also come down.
Mm-hmm. Right? I mean, what's the risk? You take a pause, you take a breath, or the risk of you continuing and everybody's more dysregulated.
Well, and I think about some of the times where I've been in some situations where I get really dysregulated, and I've had to learn that there has to be a moment of pause here. And sometimes I'm so dysregulated that the moment of pause is, I'm not going to say a word. I'm going to stand up and leave the room. And then I'm going to go do some breath on my own. And to the point where I can be calm enough to come back into the situation and say, okay, I had to leave so that things didn't get out of hand. Can
Yeah.
we just take a moment together? We just
Mm-hmm.
breathe together, calm down together. But I also think, how nice would it be to not get that to that point of activation, and to be able to
Right.
step in earlier. Do you
Yeah.
have things that help with that, with being able to develop that awareness, that body awareness of where am I at in my own dysregulation cycle?
Yeah, I think it is building a body-based vocabulary, what's happening in the body, what are the signs and symptoms in the body, how can I recognize what this is telling me? Um, and I try to work on my clients in terms of, my vocabulary of how I describe my body is going to be different than how you're going to do it. So when I'm in anxiety, like my skin feels hot and itchy. So like that's how I describe it, versus someone else will say it's creepy crawlers, and kind of noticing those pieces. And with some of my clients who have more trauma events in their life, it's learning that skill outside of dysregulation, right? So we go for a walk up a really big hill. Well, let's pause. What does your heart rate feel like right now? Oh, you're noticing it's really fast and you're out of breath. And I have a client specifically that heart rate and breath, historically, she'll say she's dying. She needs to go to the hospital. She needs medical attention. And now there's oh, my heart's supposed to do this because I'm walking up a big hill moment, versus I'm dying. And so those practice moments outside of dysregulation, I have people run feet in place when we're one-on-one, so they can feel that kind of moment too. Ice cube holding, What's the sensation in your hands when you hold ice cubes? How does it melt? What does it feel like when it trickles down? So finding these moments to build the vocabulary outside of dysregulation to then integrate into noticing pre-crisis behaviors.
That's a really helpful tool. I can imagine people going home and just holding ice cubes, at least here, because we're in Arizona, it's still hot. And that'd be a nice way to cool off. It's like a win-win. I can cool off and also I can develop body awareness.
Yep.
I'm curious. So this is something that actually comes up often. I would say of all the things that people bring up to me, the topic that is most commonly brought up is boundaries, and which in some ways feels connected to dysregulation in relationship. But what would you say, like, how could we use this frame of reference as a way to create and foster healthy relationships around some healthy boundary setting?
That's a great question. And boundaries. Everybody is learning boundaries. I go back to like the self came to mind as you were asking in terms of what parts of the self are showing up and what boundaries do those different parts need. And the metaphor that I use sometimes for boundaries is there's like us as this little tree sapling, and there's a fence around it that has to be there for the sapling to grow, right? That fence in the very beginning has to be strong and sturdy and keep out critters so they don't eat the sapling, the wind doesn't get to it, it's got the stake holding it up. And so when we're establishing boundaries, sometimes they have to be in that firmer space. And then as this sapling grows into the tree that's rooted and grounded and knows itself more, then there's discernment of what fence pole still need to be there for protection of that and what is a flexible boundary and who's trying to come towards that fence and what are they trying to ask the sapling or the tree. So I don't know why, but that visual has always been really helpful for me when I think about boundaries and building boundaries and knowing that boundaries are about me. They're expected behaviors that I will or will not tolerate from other people, and having the locus of control, that power within myself to like hold that versus giving power away to other people of like, they have to change, they have to do these things versus I'm going to hold here. So there's that, I think the perspective of self that comes into mind from that framework. And then I think we have a concept that relates to fusion of ideas that is about rule-governed behavior. And from the behavior analytic lens, like rule-governed behavior is things that we do without actually having to experience the consequence. So we all wear our seatbelt, hopefully. And when we do that, because without having to have gotten into a car crash or an accident. We just do it because we're supposed to or told to avoid this big aversive thing. And so learning histories, right, of what we're told through family, conditioning, society, those build our rule-governed behaviors in different ways. So we might act in specific ways because we think we're supposed to. And I think exploring what rules we have about ourselves in relationship to other people can also inform our boundaries, and then how to identify what boundaries we actually want to put into practice.
That's really helpful. I really like that visual too.
I don't know where I heard it, but I've held on to it for years.
Okay, and I have one other question that's really tied to that visual, because one of the things that you were saying there that I heard was this idea of connecting to self and having that firm anchoring place, that groundedness in self. One person asked about how do you create a healthy sense of self?
Gosh, curiosity is a huge piece of that. Self-compassion in different ways, and knowing there's going to be parts of yourself that you don't love. There's going to be parts of yourself that you really love. And there's those parts of yourself that you're neutral about, and welcoming all of those parts of you. And I think also kind of going back to the rule governed pieces, the stories we talk about in terms of the self, and knowing what stories are helpful and unhelpful of who we think we are, who we think we're going to become, which then connects to like that observing self of this like boundless, pure self that's going to have all these experiences to grow and learn from and integrate. So for me, it's about curiosity, like what's showing up for me, what's coming up, how do I have compassion for that, which compassion's so hard personally in different ways. It's not an easy skill to cultivate, especially when you might have really strong stories of worth and things like that that kind of shake the ground of self in different ways. But curiosity, self-compassion, and challenge, I think those are the things that come up.
Are there examples of practices that you would recommend to someone as a starting point?
For the foundation of self? Oh, I like to write letters to myself, and different versions of myself, whether that's little me or teenage me or future me, to kind of explore some of the stories that come up, the things that I need as a human from myself, from others, kind of exploring those places. I think if we go back to boundaries and body awareness, when you're interacting with people and have that sense that like, I don't feel right in this situation, but maybe can't put your finger on it, not an egregious act from someone, but those like subtle pieces that may be like, what's my value here? Was my value violated on some level? And what's the boundary that would uphold that value? Right? So those questions of the why, kind of digging into those whys as some like practical tools.
Oh, that's such a beautiful practice that it feels easy to be able to implement that and go and write letters to myself and then work from there. I think it can be really nice to be able to have something that feels so tangible.
Mm-hmm.
Like I would love to be able to, set aside an hour or two for a really good nature wander. And sometimes I just don't have that much time.
Mm-hmm. I love that, the nature wander, not a walk, but a wander around. But yeah, finding that space. And maybe it's not an hour. Maybe it's 15 minutes one day. Maybe it's 20 to tap into that space for you.
Yeah. I love nature wonder as a practice personally. I've had some very profound experiences with that, and it is a little bit different than a hike or just a walk. There's a real intentionality there. The ritualized wander, communing internally, externally. And
I did have one additional question, which was you brought up the phrase "I'm noticing," and I was just curious if there are other little snippets that kind of come up in your work that we can like take home as like, okay, I'm noticing, or whatever it might be, if you happen to have anything else.
Yeah, I'm noticing is really big. I'm having the thought that dot, dot, dot. My mind is saying, my brain is doing. Those are some good starters. Some people connect to song and voices. And so if you have a specific character that you can connect to and you can start to put your thoughts in that character's voice, that can be helpful to get distance. Sometimes I like to do the news reporter for mine of like, all right, news coming in. Ashley says she sucks today. Like, newsflash, right? So that one sometimes can be hit or miss of people thinking that they're mocking themselves but I find it puts a sense of levity into it. And what I think I learned from sand was the connection to play. And so the noticing tools that can get us to levity and play often can be really powerful for folks. So if that's a character, if it's a song and you have kids and they sing Wheels on the Bus every morning for school and you put your thoughts to Wheels on the Bus, that might seem silly and disconnected from there. And then you have more space to move through those challenging moments.
Yeah, I love that. Just those different awareness phrases and then kind of tools to help kind of create that distance and externalize what you're going through in some way that either can bring it. I love your focus on play too, like that can bring play and levity to it. Thank you.
Well, Ashley, this has just been awesome.
So fun.
I really appreciate you being willing to come on with us. Learned so much. I feel like you helped demystify some things for me that I've just been rattling around with for a while. And I also feel like I got to ask you about half of the things that I wanted
to. Well, this was really fun. I love the questions and the different perspectives of like where they took us. I don't get to talk like this a lot of times with other behavior analysts because they are focused on the doing and the how. And so this just felt really fun.
Oh, good. I'm glad. It has been really fun. Before we go, I wonder if you could share with people listening, how can they find you? What are you working on? I know you've got some new projects in the mix.
Yeah, so you can connect with me through social media, Instagram. So it's at AshNFIO. You can send a message. I have my website, which is bestillbeconnected.com. I am currently starting a partnership with forum groups, and they're peer-led groups. And the one I'm looking to launch is it's called Mind Body Harmony. And it's specific for women in their 30s, more neurodivergent women, and however you connect to that term, to actually work on practical nervous system aspects and regulation. So that's a group that's hosted through that forum. And then I do one-to-one work in different ways. So I'm happy to connect, just to chat, ask questions, or seek support in different ways.
And then you have 2 podcasts now?
So yes. So I have my own podcast, which is called Just Act. And that's integrating all of the things that we've kind of touched on, but slightly different topics. It's 15, 20 minutes each episode, hopefully to be practical and approachable. And then the other podcast I just started with my co-host of the Balanced and Becoming Retreat, which is for behavior analysts to not have the typical conference experience and have more space to learn. This will be our 3rd year going into the retreat, and we're going to host it in Colorado. So her and I decided to start a podcast to connect to the human side of being a clinician and have some fun while doing it. So we've got a couple of those out so far, and we're actually hosting an ACT book club that can be for anybody. It doesn't have to be for behavior analysts. And so she is a fantastic clinician in the Colorado Springs area. And her work is actually the intersection of psychedelics, ACT, and behavior change, which is fun to chat with her about as well. So Lisa Fox is her name. So we're starting that. So you can find us on Spotify or all other places.
And I have listened to both of those, and they are absolutely fantastic. 10 out of 10 would recommend.
Thank you. We're going to do our next one on, I think, using the voice.
Okay. I'm excited. It really just has been such a treat. Actually, this really has been so fun. So grateful for you taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the invite. It was lovely to meet you too, Krista. I just really enjoyed the conversation. And I'm excited to keep listening to your podcast as well. Thanks, you for doing it.
Yeah.
As we wrap up today's conversation, I hope you're walking away with as much insight and inspiration as we are. Dr. Ashley Fiorilli's work is a powerful reminder that real transformation comes from within through mindfulness, intentional behavior, and deep self-awareness. So whether you're looking to shift old patterns, connect more fully with yourself, or embrace new possibilities in your life, Her approach offers practical tools and profound wisdom. We'd really invite you to connect with her through the channels that she is working through, which are all in the show notes, as well as to connect with us through Instagram or Facebook or email. And we would really love to hear your thoughts about this week's episode, as well as any ideas for future topics you'd like to hear about, questions that you'd like us to answer, or guests that you'd like us to try and reach out to bring on the show. So until next time, keep delving deep and embracing the journey.